Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today for this discussion that we're going to have. I'm here with Arun Gupta, a longtime venture capitalist who also teaches at Stanford and Georgetown, and he is the CEO of Noble Reach Foundation, which is an organization that we're going to learn a little bit more about in our discussion, but briefly, it seeks to promote and build a talent pipeline that promotes technological innovation. So Arun, you recently co-authored a book titled Venture Meets Mission, which is also the title of this fireside chat. So tell us a little bit about that mission.
So, when we use the word mission in the book, there's an explicit definition around it that and then there's an implicit one. The explicit was really dealing with the societal challenges that we're seeing today. We're coming off a pandemic, a healthcare. We're coming, with geopolitical tensions right now in Ukraine and the Middle East. You've got climate, you've got great power competition, so national defense, space, et cetera. But in addition to that, we're in a period whereby, with rapidly changing technology, rapidly changing social dynamics, and rapidly changing geopolitical front, we need to have an entrepreneurial mindset to solve these problems. So the mission that we were really referring to is, how do we solve these problems by connecting with an entrepreneurial ecosystem to do so? The implicit definition around mission, though, in the other call that we had, is a call to action for this next generation. How do we really inspire this next generation, especially our top tech talent and top business talent, to care about solving these problems? And I think we're at a point in time right now, and an interesting inflection point, where students are looking for mission-driven activity, and it's an opportunity for us to bring them into this conversation as well.
And how did you arrive at this moment now, if you want to briefly go over how this all came together?
Yeah, sure. So look, I grew up in the DC area. My father worked at Naval Sea System Command for 45 years. He's still working there today. So, government service has been in our family. I spent my professional career in venture capital. So you're around entrepreneurs and building companies and taking risks. The second half of that was really investing at the intersection of technology and mission. And you saw both the challenges of that, but you also saw the magic when you made it work. I then started teaching at Georgetown and Stanford, and a class I was teaching at Stanford was called Valley Meets Mission, which was really talking to these Stanford students about how do you take the entrepreneurial spirit of the Valley, but not waste it on Candy Crush 3.0. Like, how do you go solve big problems, but do it in a for-profit way? And that the biggest of these problems, climate, national defense, healthcare, food security, is going to require some collaboration with government. And bringing those two together. And in talking to them through this, he saw many of them for the first time realizing that there was a middle ground there. And that middle ground was, we've given them this artificial vernacular of for-profit, not-for-profit, private sector, public sector, but we haven't given them a language for something in between, where you can do good and do well. And I started to see students rescind their banking and consulting offers and to go into this space. And that really was the inspiration then of, like, maybe there's something bigger here that we can tap into to really inspire this next generation to care.
And why is it so important? Why is it so important to bridge this public and private sector partnership? Why should the government be involved? And especially why now? Maybe put it into context with these emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, AI.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, I mean, the why now is just the imperative that we have. In great power competition, the feeling is if we're going to do two things right in this country, we've got to get better talent around government, and we've got to get better innovation around government. And if we don't do that, then, it will challenge our global leadership. And so the question becomes, how do we do that? And the reason why now is we've come off these multiple existential threats, and there's a timing element where we're inspiring this next generation in a way to participate in this. And the government has a role. And with things changing so rapidly, Oma, that we need to have a way to be able to pull that innovation into this ecosystem, but we're not going to solve these problems with a startup in the Valley by themselves. We need the scale and reach of government to do that. And that's where I think the imperative comes to do it now.
And how do you go about doing that? How do you get government involved? What should the government be doing to make this effort happen? Because, the government doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to sort of bridging this technological innovation. Trust tends to be low right now, especially within the government. So what is the onus on them to try to rebrand, if you will, and try to recruit this talent?
Yeah, so look, I think even in our class and in the book, we talk about this. We've got to humanize government and personalize entrepreneurship. And I think it really does start there. Like, when we talk about government, we need to break down what government is. I mean, government's a group of organizations that at a molecular level is made up of individuals. All of government isn't the same, right? And there are parts of government that are being more innovative, that are more trustworthy, that do know how to engage. And we need to start and show examples of that. And that's really what we try to do in the book. It wasn't trying to put out a hypothesis of should we do this. It's more saying we are doing this in some places. How do we do more of it? And how do we scale this? Because it's necessary for us to be able to do this if we're going to compete globally. The reason government needs to care at this point in time, though, is things are moving too quickly, right? All that innovation is happening in this entrepreneurial ecosystem right now, and how we tap into that and pull that into the reach of government is incredibly important.
Can you give us a couple of examples of how it's happening now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if you look at two big examples of of success stories, and again, they're not necessarily sometimes associated with government, but if you look at us rebuilding our entire space launch infrastructure. Here we were in 2010, falling behind in the space race, and NASA started to collaborate with the private sector, in this case SpaceX, and put dollars out there for them to hit advanced purchase orders to be able to now create an ecosystem that's about as vibrant as anywhere else in the world, and that's our entire space satellite system. If you look at what we did with Moderna, the government put out there an ambition that says that anyone that has an FDA-approved vaccine, we will buy 300 to 400 million of those. And that allowed the private sector, and again, that research came from DARPA, and now it's being used and commercialized, but the private sector mobilized the tech talent and capability around that. And so again, the question that we try to pose a bit is, we have the capacity as this country to do this. We do it. We do it during times of crisis. The issue is, how do we make this a norm and not an exception? And that's what really the conversation is about in the book. And it's also why in the book we take a real thematic theme of being optimistic, right? We're very optimistic that we're at a generational opportunity right now to really pull these pieces together to go solve these large problems.
Tell us more of how you increase incentives for talent to come work in government, because another element is that industry tends to pay more, and there's a route for career development in industry, whereas government tends to sometimes lack in that arena. So how do you incentivize?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think a lot of people immediately get to the wage gap. It's the thing, like, we can't bring talent in. And I'll share a small anecdote, right, that two CS students, both at Stanford, both female, one gets selected to do Kessel Run, which is a military program, and tells her friend she's going to go do Kessel Run, and her friends go, why would you do that? Like, why would you go to government? The other one was selected to do Teach for America. And her friends go, wow, that's amazing. They get a really reaffirming, enthusiastic response. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, and then you can go do whatever you want. And that example actually gets to the core that it's not only about the money, it's about something a lot deeper, right? It's about prestige, it's about respect, but it's also being viewed as a career enhancer, right? And the Teach for America person in that example is actually earning half as much. But that is considered a really prestigious program to go forward with. And so I think the models out there that we can do with government, the question is, there are structural limitations of what government can do. So can we have a not-for-profit out there that's collaborating with government to help coordinate that talent and create that social currency and create that training so that people view this as the place to start your career? And there's enough inflection points of things that are happening right now on the technological front, especially in AI, where you could make this a really exciting time to be coming in for a year or 2 years, 3 years, and then kind of decide what you want to do with your career, whether it's go to a different government agency, whether it be going into academics, or going back into the private sector.
So we talked a lot about the responsibility of the government to help build this pipeline. What can industry do? Well, how can industry get involved and be a part of this effort?
Yeah, so, industry has an important role here, and especially the entrepreneurial industry. In what we write, we talk about the need for strategic empathy. People coming in from the Valley saying, here's how it should be done, is going to fall, with no real response to that. because you're not respecting what the other party is bringing to the table. What we need are folks that are actually dual citizens. There's a good friend of mine that's the CTO at the CIA, Nan Mulchandani, four-time Valley entrepreneur, now a CTO at the CIA, and he describes himself as a dual citizen. And he says what's powerful about that nomenclature is that both you have belonging in two different communities, right? You don't come in with a hierarchy of one is better than the other, so that when he's at the CIA, he's able to take his folks over to the Valley to meet people. It's like taking them back to your family, right? And you get this trusted relationships that are there, and you see what's happening firsthand as opposed to just hearing about it, and vice versa. And the reason I think the dual citizenship model or vernacular is really powerful is because implicit in that is trust. Mm. What's lacking is trust, right? What you need in the private sector are folks that have been inside of government, that come outside, that have a shared vernacular, have relationships, have empathy of like how the system works and how do we need to collaborate. And those are the kinds of things that are missing, and I think those diverse teams are the ones that you see winning right now. And there are plenty of models of folks that are doing really well collaborating at this intersection. And to the T, all of them have diverse teams of folks that have spent time in government, but also the commercial sector. I think one or the other is difficult to then just move into the other world.
What are some of the potential consequences if this collaboration does not take place? I mean, I know you touched on a little bit at the top, but if you want to elaborate a little on why public and private sector has to work together on this.
Yeah, and let me double click on that a little bit, because it's not just public and private sector. In the book, we're really taking a look at public and the venture community, the venture ecosystem or the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I say that because I think people will immediately go, oh, public-private partnerships, that's been around forever, right? Everyone's talked about that. But public-private partnerships also imply government and big company. And what we're getting at here is a new framework of how we really think about and sensitize government to collaborating with ventures. A large company is fully funded. They're profitable. They're kind of doing their thing. A venture may not be fully funded, right? So simple things like timeliness of getting contracts out become very important. Whereas with a large company, if it slips 6 months or a year, no harm, no foul. With a small company, it could be devastating, especially if you're ramping up. The other piece of this is understanding that what government is what companies are looking for government many times, especially entrepreneurial companies, isn't capital, right? Having been a VC sitting on these boards, we had the capital. What we were looking for from government were contracts, right? We were looking for the demand signal that our product or service that our portfolio company is providing is valuable and has a large market opportunity in this segment. And that's what government can provide for us. Now, if we don't figure out how to pull those technologies into our strategic government spheres, what we risk is falling behind, right? If you look at what's happening in our national security space right now, we're falling further and further behind, and we're playing catch up. And the way we need to play catch up is allowing the risk profile of the private sector and the entrepreneurial sector to emerge. Look, I truly believe the real superpowers of our liberal democracy here in the US are twofold. One, it's our ability to create talent. Like you look at our higher ed ecosystem, our ability to create talent is far surpassed anywhere else in the world. And you look at our ability to innovate and our capacity to create new technologies. And the evidence of that is everyone from around the world comes here for that, right? So those are our superpowers. So if we're going to compete going forward, what we need to be able to do is combine those or align those around larger government ambitions, because that's how we're going to be able to compete against our adversaries. And it's why I'm also very optimistic, because I think today the ability to mobilize capital around people, purpose, and profit has never been greater. 20 years ago when I started investing, but even 10 years ago, if you were doing something in this space, if you could raise a $5 million round, that was a big deal. Today, you could start with a $50 million round. And the reason that's important is it gives you the ability to bridge some of these gaps that you're referring to.
So obviously there's been a lot of interest at the federal and state level in AI and in forming regulations around AI. President Biden released an executive order. Congress has been holding plenty of hearings and briefings on the matter. What do you make of their efforts so far, and what's sort of your call to action, especially in regards to the importance of building out this tech talent?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Look, directionally, I think it's the right conversations to be having. There's a lot going on around tech. There's a lot going on around policy. But I think the piece that we miss is it really comes down to talent. Like, we've got to get better talent into government, and we've got to figure out how to do that quickly. And it doesn't all have to be senior talent. I mean, there's great young talent, AI talent on all these college campuses, grad students, that we should be looking to see how we can pull them into this. Because we can't be coming up with regulations and policies around something that we don't understand. That's also has, a derivative negative effect down the roads. So just doing anything isn't the right answer either. Having said that, laying out the framework out there as they did in the EO about having each agency have a chief AI officer, I think is a good thing. The question is, how do you do that? How do you fill that role? Having a certain number of folks in each agency versed in AI, incredibly important. Again, how do you create that pipeline to fill that role? And that's a bit of what we're trying to collaborate on and try to assist with in the work we're doing at Noble Reach.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing at Noble Reach. How are you working with government and agencies to promote this?
So just to backtrack, so Noble Reach is a foundation we started following, as we were writing the book. We have a $500 million endowment, and the idea with the endowment now is to, again, taking a step back, if we're going to do two things right in this country, is to build better talent pipelines and better pipelines for innovation to come into government. We talk about ourselves as being an infrastructure entity. We're trying to modernize that infrastructure. So on the talent side, what does that mean? We're creating programs for interns coming in. Think Teach for America Scholars Program. We're launching for this summer our first 1-year to 2-year fellowship with students coming in. And in both cases, I'll get asked on some of these podcasts and other interviews, like, how do you inspire the kids to want to do this? And I kind of chuckle because, that's the easy part. Example, for our intern program this year, we had 1,200 applicants in the first 48 hours. Students want to do stuff when you say it's about mission, tech, and entrepreneurship. With our scholars program, we're 10x oversubscribed on placements that we have. And part of this is marketing. And this is what a not-for-profit can do that a for-profit can't. That government may not be able to. We can show up on campus and recruit, right? We can also provide training to augment their experience while they're in government. And then we can also help place them afterwards. And these are all important things that help modernize the way we think about the talent infrastructure. And I think we need to be thinking about this as infrastructure. Like, we can't be sending students to USA Jobs and feel like we're going to get a good outcome from that. We don't, my observation, even on the inside, is that when we were teaching on the academic side, the reason we don't have many students coming in is none of the professors in the engineering schools and the business schools have been in government before. So they're not advising their students to go there. And then on top of that, the agencies aren't showing up to recruit. So we shouldn't be surprised that less than 6% of tech workers in government are under the age of 30. Because we haven't built the infrastructure. We haven't modified that or modernized that. And so that's a lot of what we're really focused on. And then third piece of this is really a fellows program. Like, I think there's a growing degree of folks, and think of my cohort, of folks that have had a successful first career. We're all living longer. We're all thinking about what's the next career look like, that want to be able to deploy their talents. They may not go into government, but they want to deploy their talents around government-oriented problems. So giving them a pathway to do that. So that's the talent infrastructure that we're working on. For those folks, we're also collaborating right now with some of the government research institutes, DARPA and NSF specifically, and helping them commercialize their technology in a meaningful way. And so that again is where an intermediary or a not-for-profit can come into play that can help them really kind of bridge this gap and help us really connect our entrepreneurial ecosystem with government.
I know we just have a few minutes left here, so I want to make sure we have time to take a couple questions from the audience. If anyone wants to. Libby.
Thank you, thanks. I was also kind of wondering, I've also heard of this example that you have of InQtel, right? Like a government actually creating a VC themselves. Is that kind of also a way to, is that a fruitful way to kind of intervene in that more capital arena, as in working with the government together? Because as I understood it, they particularly also focus on, let's say, technologies that they don't necessarily immediately need themselves, but also would still like to see, stay in society and be able to build further. Is that also a role to take, and is that then linked to, second question, to the intelligence agencies, also for infrastructure, for instance, or energy or stuff like that, from a European perspective? Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, you're asking about InQtel, which we actually profile in the book as an example of a model that works, right? And the question becomes like, how do we do this across government and do it more importantly? The reason InQtel, the model works effectively is because they shifted their model. They actually started off where they were investing directly in deals. And what they found is that the VCs were bringing their worst deals to them because they didn't really need the capital. When they shifted to saying, hey, look, we can give you contracts, once we know that people inside want to use your technology, the best deals came to them. Because we didn't need to get diluted with other people's capital when we had capital. Well, again, what we needed was a signaler that this mattered in the IC. And they became a great partner then for the venture community to be able to gauge the applicability for their tech. So absolutely, I think a model like that works in other areas. The question is, we shouldn't be beholden to just one agency. The second is we got to be careful that, and this is part of our North Star at Noble Reach as well, is how do you create solutions at scale, right? Scale is important. The flip side of that is you have all these smaller organizations doing venture stuff inside. That can become confusing to the venture community of who to go talk to, right? So when we think about our talent program, even though we're starting with 20 students, the idea is like, how do we get to 100 and how do we get to 1,000 so that we create a movement where people are really thinking about this in the ethos. I'll give you an example, like with Purdue, we just announced this week, we're launching the first of its kind, believe it or not, first of its kind in the US, an engineering for public service, innovation for public service certificate. So for the first time, you're in an engineering school, you can actually decide you're going to take 2 or 3 classes, do an internship, and get a certificate that says innovation for public service, which sends a strong signal about what's important to you. And the idea is that we want to replicate that and take it to other universities, which is a conversation that we're having. And again, it's how do we put it in the ethos, right, for talent? And then with the InQtel folks is how do you create those bridges, those translators that know how to speak both languages? I think that's the real power of the InQtel model, is that they are dual citizens. Many of those folks that are working there have been in the private sector or on the venture sides. They have trust with that community, and then they go on to the Intel side, and vice versa.
If you want to just briefly explain the InQtel model for folks who don't know.
Yeah, sure, sorry. So InQtel, think of them as a venture arm of the intelligence community. Essentially what they do is they partner with venture firms and identify technologies that they think will be useful inside of the intelligence community. Rather than saying we'll invest X, Y, Z $1 million into the company, what they say is we'll find you a contract, and that contract they'll take some warrants on that, which allows them to kind of have some venture-like upside in those opportunities. But again, it's a very collaborative way. If you're a venture person or an entrepreneur, one, you get a contract, which is important. You get a demand signal, which is important, and it's very little dilution.
I love that you're talking about getting young people into government, in particular in AI. I run a software engineering school, and so we're constantly thinking about trying to get our students to look at all of the job opportunities. As someone who spent almost 8 years in DC, we saw this as a problem on Congress, on Capitol Hill too. Getting someone to take a $30,000 staff assistant job instead of go take the Deloitte job. It's very difficult. What levers do you see exist that we can pull so that we compel these young people to take the government job instead of the one that's going to pay 2 or 3x?
Yeah, so a key part I didn't discuss in the program that we're launching with Noble Reach, right? And part of the reason, again, our theory on the case here is that you need a not-for-profit to sit on the outside, is that we can collaborate with the private sector, right? And what does that mean? So we have some of the investment banks, consulting firms, big tech firms, also providing training while students are inside a government, right? And they want to do that because these are the kinds of students they might want to hire when they come out of the program. that demand indicator is really important, right? If you think about the magic of Teach for America, it is that when you come out, you feel like I can still go anywhere, and people will respect this experience in a meaningful way. If we introduce those folks early on and they're getting to know you, I think students then look at the experience very differently. What they worry about is if I go do something like this, will those doors still be open to me later? And we're forcing them to make a decision much earlier than they really want to. And this way they were able to not only keep the optionality open, but probably open the aperture of opportunities they have in front of them. So that's our theory on the case of how you do that. And I think at least the early indicators with the number of applicants we're getting is confirming that.
I think if we have time for one quick, Arun, as someone who's been in the tech space for many years now, investing in tech,
Yeah.
I just want to ask your perspective on this AI boom that we're living in currently. I mean, could you foresee this happening? Are you taken aback by it? And where do you think we're going from here?
So you could have foreseen it happening. No one could have predicted when it would happen. So the fact that we're actually now living in it is pretty transformative. Look, to me, this has a lot of the same feelings of when I lived through, the dot-com times in 95, 97. It's a total paradigm shift. It's a rewrite of technology. And it's going to start with people doing add-ons, adding it onto their business. But I think the real value is going to get created for those that build their businesses from the ground up, incorporating AI into it. Much like we saw with folks on the internet, where people added it onto their business as another channel, but then you had internet-only businesses emerge, you saw mobile-only businesses emerge, cloud-only businesses emerge, and now you're going to see AI-first businesses emerge, right? And so I think that's the really exciting opportunity. The other piece here is the applied side of AI. I think it hits every industry. Right? And so whether you're a manufacturing company, a construction company, an agricultural company, a bio company, AI has a tremendous application. And primarily because, take bio for example, the amount of, the velocity of innovation and tests and trials you can run around AI without having to go hire 1,000 PhDs is phenomenal. Right? So it brings down the cost of experimentation in a meaningful way. And I think the velocity of advances that we're going to see over the next 5 years in these domains, which may not be AI advances, these are bio advances, but were enabled because of AI, is what I think will be really exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Arun, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Emma.